Okay. So today for podcast number two, we're going to introduce Miss Ula. So if you can introduce yourself, just kind of saying how you belong in the Jewish community or your identity, what do you do now? And then we'll go on to some other questions.
Sure. I'm Ula Zusman. I am a clinician for children and adolescents at the Jewish Family and Career Services Agency, which is a community based agency. We see about 60% of our clients who are Jewish, and then the rest are from the broader community. I identify as a conservative Jew. So there are actually, there are tons of streams within the Jewish religion, but there are three kind of major ones. There's Orthodox, there's conservative, and there's Reform. So it's kind of middle of the road. Our services are in Hebrew for the majority of the time. Um, and we keep most of the injunctions and commandments, but they are adapted to modern ways of life. So
Mm.
that would be my cultural identity. And then I speak a little funny because I'm originally South African. So things that would be helpful to know as a counselor. It would be really important to establish what aspect of Judaism people identify with at the start. There are some people that are cultural Jews. They identify with a culture but don't necessarily belong to any of those streams. There are some people that are traditional and will keep some of the commandments and the holidays and that kind of thing, but may not attend synagogue. There are some people that are culinary Jews. They believe in all the Jewish foods, but don't do any of the other stuff. Um, Within the broad spectrum of Judaism, you've got ultra Orthodox and Orthodox. That is probably going to be amongst the most challenging of the cultural aspects. I
Hmm.
had, for example, a mom who approached me to see her teenage son when he learned from the Orthodox community. When he learned that he would be speaking with a female counselor, he's like, no, not prepared to do it. I won't.
Oh, wow.
So, male and female gender roles are very tight in the Orthodox community. They're very circumscribed and
Hmm.
kind of um, boundaried. And there is a strong emphasis on modesty. And he was just not prepared to engage with a female counselor. Unfortunately, we don't have any male counselors at the moment
Hmm.
that work predominantly with children and adolescents. We've got one, but he also sees adults, and there was no space on his dance card for that, so he didn't get to be seen by our agency. Um, Other cultural considerations would include the fact that um, Jews are the ultimate scapegoat and minority
Hmm.
in um, in the white psyche in terms of anti-Semitism, and
Hmm.
whether you're identify as a Jew, don't identify as a Jew, if someone else identifies you as a Jew, you can bet that there's an element of anti-Semitism attached. There are assumptions, there are old myths. People believe that Jews have horns. And
Hmm.
so, people coming from small towns may have their heads rubbed to kind of check for the horns. There's an assumption that all Jews are rich, which is not true. Um, there are assumptions. There's the blood libel from, the Middle Ages that Jews kill Christian babies and drink their blood.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
yeah, that story's around. The Catholic Church formally apologized for that about, I want to say somewhere between 50 and 70 years ago. My dates are fuzzy,
That's
but
not even long ago.
no. So it's there, and people were raised on that. There is elements of Christianity that blame Jews for killing Christ. So we carry that. Um, and then you have the Holocaust, and that is a scar in the Jewish psyche across all elements and aspects
Hmm.
that is hard to eradicate and drives some cultural considerations. Um, whether you identify as Jewish or don't identify as Jewish, that scar sits there.
Hmm.
So that's That's a piece of it. Um, and anti-Semitism can be extremely subtle. I remember volunteering at a senior living facility in high school, and I'd been seeing this woman for about 4 months, and then she discovered I was Jewish, and she said, "But you're so pretty."
Ah,
And I was like, "Thank you." And in my head, I was saying something very different. Um, so there can be subtleties to it. It doesn't have to be the Nazi um,
mhm. But
symbols.
microaggressions, I
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah. So it's there. There is a stereotype of what Jews look like. Now, my hair at the moment is blue, but it's typically kind of a dirty blonde.
Hmm.
And, the assumption is all Jews are dark with big noses and curly hair. Um, there is a museum in Israel, the Israeli museum, that shows a photograph. There's a photo display of what Jews look like, and it's Jews from around the world. And you have Indian Jews, and you have Chinese Jews, and you have Jews of color, and you have the Russians with their white blonde hair, and you have Ethiopian Jews, and it's just dozens and dozens and dozens of
So
faces, and
complex.
there is no one single aspect of Jewry. So that's something to bear in mind. Lots of jargon that's in Hebrew. If you don't understand, just ask someone to explain. They should be more than willing to. Um,
Hmm.
I'm thinking of other stereotypes. There's what's commonly referred to in America as the Jap, the Jewish American princess, kind of a spoilt
Oh,
brat.
wow.
Um,
And I
there,
had a question about the modesty piece
sure,
too.
sure.
So whenever that happens in that situation where you get a male client who does identify as Jewish and doesn't want to work with the female counselor, is there like resources? Is there like counseling centers where they do specialize in working with Orthodox Jewish community members or
So that would be more private practices. There
okay.
isn't another agency like ours in the Jewish community in Atlanta. So we are about 32 counselors at our
Oh,
agency.
huge.
Yeah, we're big. And like I said, 60% of our clients are Jewish. So it would be more individual practices,
Hmm.
solo practitioners that would maybe specialize in that. We used to have someone from the Orthodox community working with us, but he was also a teacher in addition to being a counselor, and
Hmm.
his teaching obligations just overtook his time. And so
Yeah.
he is now in private practice. But I would be more than willing to share names if people need anything. They're welcome to reach out to me. You are more than free to share my email address if I can be of any assistance to anyone.
Mhm.
Um, within the Orthodox community, the modesty is probably the main piece in terms of uh, cultural gender considerations.
Mhm.
The belief is that men are bound by the time-based rituals and that women are closer to God, so we don't need to observe those time-based rituals. I have my own opinions of what that means, but the basic understanding is that women's role is to raise the next generation of little Jews,
Mhm.
and that um, the men are supposed to be involved in reading Torah. Now, within the conservative movement, women read Torah as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something I appreciate. To my mind and my kind of modern understanding of equality feels more balanced. But people
Mhm.
within the Orthodox community would view it very differently and feel very comfortable in those roles. So part of the modesty is you're going to see um, Orthodox women wearing long sleeves and long skirts even in the height of summer.
Mhm.
They're going to cover their hair with a wig if they're married. They're Saturdays are off limits. Friday night to Saturday night, sunset to sunset is off limits for Jewish Orthodox clients.
Mhm.
Conservative Jews like me don't particularly get spun out about that, but the conservative rabbis are going to observe that sort of stuff. And there are some conservative Jews that keep the Sabbath. So it's a very varied, confusing, checkerboard kind of situation where there is no one true way to be a Jew, I think would be
Yeah.
the thing to take away from it. And so exploring the cultural elements of Judaism would be unique to each individual. So there are broad
Mhm.
principles, and then it's worth exploring from a culturally humble perspective exactly what their Jewish identity means to them. Um, there are
And
some
I
Jews.
would say that too, like as a counselor, and since I've been learning about the Jewish community, that you can't go in with like assumptions or biases because you're right that there is some people that identifies culturally, some religiously, some take little bits here and there, some do all the bits. And so you just don't know until you're sitting in front of that person, like how do they identify within the community?
No, and one of the, so there are a couple of, if you want to term them threats to Jewish identity. One is the anti-Semitism, which
Mhm.
is rampant and rife. And, political climate over the last couple of years has seen a rise in anti-Semitic acts by, like 50, over 50% of, uh, hate crimes.
Yeah.
Um, Another one is assimilation, where Jews marry out of the faith. So there are a lot of mixed marriages, which is more common within the Reform stream, where you have Jews marrying non-Jews. Some choose to raise their children Jewish, some choose to honor both parents' cultural and spiritual roots. Some
Mhm.
choose only to honor their partner's roots and spiritual practices. So in terms of in terms of I don't want to call it survival, but continuity of
Mhm.
the Jewish people, that is a significant threat that people see. And so there is an emphasis on sending kids to Jewish day schools, which tends
Mhm.
to be part of their Jewish identity, sending them to Jewish summer camps, sleepaway camps,
Yes,
which
I
is
heard.
another central piece of it. And then the last part is organized trips to Israel. So you'll find
Oh.
some Jews that don't keep any of the commandments, but are Zionists. They believe in the state of Israel. They believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist. They believe in supporting the state of Israel in many aspects. And within that, you have an entire cultural spectrum and political spectrum. You have right wing Jews that support the state of Israel. You have left wing Jews that believe in Israel's right to exist and disagree with the government's practices. So again, it's really nuanced. And then you have the ultra Orthodox that don't believe Israel should exist, some elements of them, until the Messiah comes. So they don't
Mhm.
support the secular state of Israel because the
Mhm.
Messiah isn't here yet.
Wow.
So again, complicated, messy, um, fascinating.
Yes. And would you say your experience as being Jewish in America versus South Africa is like completely different, or is there some similarities or differences?
So in South Africa, I was brought up Orthodox.
Mhm.
So girls sat above in the balcony, boys were on the main floor with the Torah.
Wow.
Girls were, to my mind, sidelined. Um,
Mhm.
the bat mitzvah I had in South Africa was more of an orchestrated play. It had nothing to do with the Torah. It was taking quotations from it, but it was like two girls stand up and say this, and then they sit down. Then three girls stand up and they say that. And
Mm.
it didn't feel like a holy ceremony to me.
Mhm.
So there wasn't a conservative movement in South Africa when I grew up there. There was either Orthodox or Reform with nothing kind of in between.
Mhm.
So that was different. Moving to the States and having that as an option was pretty culturally significant to me. It was much easy. It is much easier to keep kosher. So our family keeps kosher, which means that we don't mix meat and milk in the same meal. We have separate pots and pans and dishes and Tupperwares and cutlery and spatulas and pretty much everything. We have
Lots of
two
kitchen.
sinks. Yes, we have two sinks. We have two ovens.
What?
So yeah, we keep everything separate, two microwaves. So
Wow.
everything is heated separately, and then vegetables are kind of a free-for-all. They can be either,
Mhm.
so they get cooked together. Um, but it's much easier in this country to keep kosher than it is in South Africa or Australia, where my husband is from. In Australia, there was a kosher butcher who was only open like Thursday afternoons and Friday mornings. You came and got your stuff, or you were without. In
Wow.
South Africa, it was a little easier. We had a section in the supermarket that was devoted to kosher stuff, but the ingredients were extremely limited.
Hmm.
And here, most grocery stores carry, if not fresh, then frozen kosher chicken. And there's a kosher butcher that delivers, and it's much easier to keep kosher here in this country. Um, you know, Jews, although we are the minority, seem to be prominent at the moment in political spheres. I'm
Hmm.
thinking of the first gentleman. Um, the fact that the White House has a Seder, which is our Passover meal, or that they honor Hanukkah, that would never happen in South Africa. You just wouldn't see that. There was anti-Semitism there as well. Uh,
Hmm.
and the ANC, which is the leading political party in South Africa, identifies very strongly with the PLO because they both identify as freedom fighters. And so there is a very strong anti Israel stance that is
Yeah.
steadily being softened because, amongst other things, Israel is pioneering farming practices that require very little water,
Hmm.
which they are sharing with the rest of the world, which is extremely helpful in Africa with the droughts that we have. So
Hmm.
that stance is softening, but there is still, amongst your average South African, a lot of anti-Semitism there.
So it's like no escape. It's just embedded in
It
the
is,
whole
it
identity.
is. And, the assumptions break down. People, um, we need to get to know each other on a fundamental level. Um,
Hmm.
Amongst the Jewish community, there are certain assumptions like Jews don't drink or drug, or there's no domestic violence. So Jews hold our community to a higher standard and at the same time ignore the um, the problems and the issues that arise. So
Hmm.
the fact is, Jews do drink and drug. Jews
Yeah.
do experience domestic violence within our community. So our agency actually has something called HAMSA, which is, and I'm going to screw this up, helping, it's something to do with drug abuse,
Hmm.
helping Atlantans manage substance abuse or
Okay.
something like that. And then we have the Shalom Bayit program, which stands for Peace in the Home, which is for those who've experienced domestic violence. And they
Wow.
don't have to be Jewish for the Shalom Bayit program in order to participate in our program.
Hmm.
So, it's shining the spotlight on our communities are more alike than different in some aspects, and that those issues need to be brought to the forefront because there is a compounding of shame as a
Hmm.
result of that because of the myths within the Jewish community that those things don't exist or don't happen to Jews.
Hmm.
So we need to address that and deal with that and expose it to the light.
Yeah. And because I mean that we're all human too at the
Yeah,
end of the day, which means like regardless of however you identify, you are still susceptible to abuse, trauma, um, domestic violence, or anything of that sort. And I like that you mentioned that because when I spoke to the rabbi in the previous podcast, she said the same thing. I like that you guys are like not showing like a cookie cutter version or something that we always see on TV. I'm saying like the reality that a lot of people don't realize.
yeah,
Because unfortunately, people do have these assumptions about the Jewish community or even certain religious, like no trauma ever occurs. And as a counselor, we all know that anyone can experience trauma and there's no like secret code to avoid trauma or anything,
correct.
no protection.
amongst the other things that we would like to ignore or deny is the racism in the Jewish community. You
Mhm.
get Jews across the political spectrum, and racism is prevalent and um, sometimes directed at Jews of color
Mhm.
who are a minority within the Jewish community, which is a minority within the American community. Um, so that exists. You know, Back in civil rights days, there was a much closer allegiance between the Jewish and the Black communities. And
Mhm.
the organization that you're going to be speaking with next, the American Jewish Committee with Dove Wilker, will speak to you about the Black Jewish Coalition and the efforts being made by Black leaders and Jewish leaders to bring the communities together because we have so much in common, and we can amplify each other's voices.
Mhm.
There's not enough of that being done. So I'm actually part of their um, organization and part of the Black Jewish Coalition. So I meet with two members from the Urban League once a
Mhm.
month. And it's just about forging ties. It's about aligning our communities. It's about bringing us together in ways where we are similar and then amplifying voices and supporting each other where we are different.
Yeah. And then you kind of went into my last question about resources and ways to get involved and advocating. So,
Yes. So there is something called the Federation of Greater Atlanta, which
mhm.
is kind of an umbrella organization that most of the charities, organizations, resources in Atlanta fits into, and they have a calendar on their website. So you'll be able to see what activities are there, and everybody coordinates with that. So we try not to overlap with the different agencies. There are dozens of agencies for the Jewish community. Um, Anything from uh, JIFLO, which is kind of short-term loans that are interest-free, to JELF, which is for student loans that are interest-free
Oh.
for Jewish students, um, to, Jewish camps, uh, Jewish environmental groups. There's something for everybody there. So there'll be
Mhm.
lots of opportunities. You can also check out the various synagogues' websites because there's a concept called Tikkun Olam, and I'm not sure if Rabbi Beiner went into that. It's called healing the world, and the understanding is it's not ours to correct, but neither are we free to ignore it.
Mhm.
So everybody has to do their part in restoring the world. And that typically translates to social justice aspects.
I
Uh,
love that.
and so each synagogue will have a community outreach where people can get involved. And,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of the other organizations. There's JNF, which stands for the Jewish National Fund, and they have a young professionals organization where there's networking and support of the Jewish state of Israel. Um, AJC has a youth aspect to it called Access. So there are dozens of organizations, and it depends on your area of interest.
Mhm.
So there are lots of ways for Jewish clients who may be feeling separate from the community to find an avenue to get involved. And there's also ways for counselors to then support and advocate for Jewish clients within that. It could be as simple as, for those that are at a college campus, looking at inviting administration to check the Jewish calendar before they schedule exams.
Mhm.
The same way that they should do that for Muslim students, not schedule things during Ramadan. So
Mhm.
there are ways for people to advocate in different spheres. Um,
And what
and
I hear from what you're saying, especially talking about the resources, is knowledge is so important to advocate. So the
yes,
more you know, the more we can advocate for communities that people don't normally talk about or that isn't the privileged religion or community.
yes, yes,
Mhm.
critical to do so. Um, and and to educate on stereotypes amongst your non-Jewish clients as well, because People spout off things without thinking because that's what they've been indoctrinated into. And
Mhm.
gently challenging, broaching, bridging comments can evoke very rich discussions as well.
Mhm.
Um,
And did you have anything else to add or?
I'm just so grateful that you're covering this topic.
Uh,
Um, Jews tend to get overlooked
mhm.
or targeted. It's kind of a weird mixture of the two. And so
Yeah.
to share resources and to share different voices and perspectives on the Jewish community is just so valuable and so appreciated.
Thank you. And like I told the rabbi that I spoke to in the previous podcast, is that of course, I'm doing this for a class, but I also want to continue these connections and continue these conversations because I think it's important as a counselor, we need to be well rounded, as you know, as a counselor. And unfortunately, in our social justice classes, we get like a brief view on like religion or different communities, which is no fault of its own. So we have to go out and do the work ourselves. And immediately when I thought of this assignment, I was like, the Jewish community, because living in the Atlanta area, it is pretty big. And
Mm.
I have a lot of clients come in from the crisis unit. When I used to work at Crystal Nady, they would be coming in. And I just didn't know anything. I didn't know how to empower or to even counsel. And then I would just be overwhelmed and stereotypical, like, oh, well, they do things this way, so I need to do it this way. Like, and just doing this just helps shed a light on like Deaetta. They're normal people. They just do different things and different customs and they do this way. But other than that, they're normal people. And so I think it's important for not only me to know that, but all other counselors to know that too.
Yes. And when in doubt, ask.
Hmm.
Most people are open and willing to explaining and giving you the crash course in what their belief is. Um, some of them are going to sound pretty foreign, and some of them are going to be like, yeah, of course, everybody believes that. So, um, yeah, just grateful for you.